This is the Very Not Normal podcast with me, your host, Frieda Vizel, and this is episode 8 on technology as a dystopian future. I have been meaning to put out an episode on the Hasidic economy, which is quite fascinating and will open up the conversation about economies of scale and a lot of the modern capitalism and how that is directing conversation. But alas, that episode requires quite a bit of work that I have been pushing to the back burner. So today I am going to be talking about something that is very foundational to my orientation, my current philosophy, or what's on my mind, what I'm thinking about a lot, which is the future dominated by a technics mindset. So let me just share it with you as I am thinking about it, or in the way it's on my mind at the very moment. It's now Monday evening of a very snowy, very white 24-hour period here in Brooklyn, New York. We expect to be getting snow for another about 24 hours, and it's been coming down hard and windy, and it's been cozy and quiet. And when I saw that we're going to get what they call a nor'eastern, this big snowstorm, I made myself a promise to be off the internet, not necessarily off tech, but off the internet for the duration. Because I find increasingly that I have a kind of sad dependency and a very unhappy relationship with what's become our techno-utopian or techno-dystopian age. And I want to tell you a little bit about where I stand, what I am thinking about technology, which influences a great deal my worldview. So here goes. I'm all bundled up in blankets, and the dog is by me, and we've got candles on, so I can't get too upset about the topic now. Like most of us, like much of the public, I once imagined that the internet would be the frontier of technology that would liberalize knowledge and that would expand what we knew and who could know. And if you've listened to my other podcasts and you read my things, then you'll know that I very naturally feel like information should be liberalized. I don't think that experts should be the owners of the domain of information. I think we need to share how we get to what we believe and why, even if we have fancy titles. So the promise of the internet, of course, was very alluring. And my early experience with the internet was with the blogs. I wrote a blog, my first blog, when I was 21. My son was already born, but he was still a baby, and it was an anonymous blog. And it was a blog that was partially fictional, partially an attempt for me to disassociate myself from whatever fun I was having meddling online. And it was definitely not supposed to have the kind of consequences on my life that it had, which was that it allowed these niggling thoughts that I had suppressed in the back of my mind to come to the fore and to mature and to become full-blown apostasy and independent thinking that ultimately led to the demise of my marriage and my leaving the community. And when I left, after I left, was about when Facebook was starting to take off. It was before the share button. It was before Facebook became a place for news and for self-promotion, but it was already when we no longer, like in the blog days, were anonymous and were mostly text-driven, but it was now about identifying ourselves and showing pictures from our lives and sharing it with the network of friends we had collected. And this Facebook was really where I stepped into it with both feet, completely blindly and unthinkingly, and just reacted to the reactions. I just went along with the changes Facebook was making and the audience was making and kept adapting to that. So it began with showing pictures to just some people, and then you're sharing to a wider public, and suddenly it's getting to your head and you're feeling like a somebody. My experience at the time was that I was getting very carried away with the sense that people were seeing me. They were finally hearing me and maybe even discovering me. And here was an important medium for me to share of myself. And as I shared, I got feedback that said, yes, you indeed are somebody. So I shared more. And then when I didn't share, who was I? What am I up to? What makes me anything? It was this kind of empty, confusing feeling of, I'm a helium balloon that is running out of air. I'm coming down, and the only option is to add more helium. So I found myself in a cycle where, in order for me to feel like my life had any value, I needed other people to press that like button, to share, to say wow. And the effect of that is that you begin to choreograph your life. You walk the street and you think, oh, that will look great. People will like that. I'll put that up. And you talk to someone, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, how can I turn this into something that everyone will go, wow? And you know in the back of your mind that specific people will make good stories. Your mother, your Hasidic family member, your ex-Hasidic whatever. So you're walking around making narratives, formulating the words, setting it up, and you're not even sure if your life is happening because you're choreographing it or you're choreographing what has happened. It is a chicken and an egg problem, and suddenly, who are you? What are you about? And why do you feel so terrible when you're not writing something, posting something? Why do you have the sense that you're falling? And why does it not feel right to just not share anything? I eventually went on Facebook, and boy, I hope I never get sucked up into the performative life again, because I think it's an addiction. And I think, like any pernicious addiction, in order for you to feel better, you need more of the addictive substance, and anything else cannot replace it. And I also think it steals of you the most important moments in life, because instead of experiencing them organically, you are framing it, you are choreographing it, you're making it, you're setting it up. This performative element has been a subject of criticism from the dawn of the photograph, or even before the portrait, but the photograph popularized the public's ability to take pictures and perform life. But of course, it's never been to the degree that social media has made it into. And social media has unexpectedly exaggerated so much of what technology does that we now can't help but see it and face that technology does not simply make life easier or more accessible, but by its very medium, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message, by its very medium changes our experience. And because it is getting so ubiquitous, the degree to which it's changing our experiences is colossal. It is huge. I believe that the future is technology, for better and, in my opinion, for worse. How we live, the very core of how we experience life, is being changed by technology. And the effects of this is, I think, the most important philosophical question, the most important question we all should be asking for us now and into the future. So let me tell you a little more, for instance, about what I mean by these fundamental changes. We know that now in the 21st century, as we approach what the people in economics call the fourth industrial revolution, tech, Silicon Valley is probably the biggest economic source. It's the greatest source of wealth. And with wealth comes power. With wealth comes influence. With wealth comes the ability to do philanthropy. And the kinds of people who are very good at tech, who succeed in this new economy where there is unprecedented opportunity for wealth, where the global reach and the scale itself allows for the lucky few to end up with unbelievable amounts of money. The people who succeed are not people with muscle, obviously. The people who succeed are not people with great social emotional skills, with great street smarts, with common sense. There's a type. We know the type. It's usually a mathematical thinker, someone who's good at book smarts, someone who might be very nerdy and good with numbers and good with looking at details or thinking in terms of disruption, but not necessarily have a lot of social know-how or not necessarily be able to see the forest for the trees. And this is often used to encourage people who are maybe on the spectrum and tell them, don't worry, Bill Gates is maybe on the spectrum and maybe Mark Zuckerberg is on the spectrum. And all of these very, very awkward and very successful people on top all have what looks like social difficulties and see how successful they are. We know that not being good at understanding, for instance, interpersonal things intuitively is not an impediment to great wealth. So the kinds of people who are naturally selected for great success often show themselves to be unable to grasp specific empathetic concepts and unable to grasp the humanness. They almost have a kind of robotic-like and analytic. It's like they're in their heads. It's a little like the men who will have a whole relationship in their own head without ever actually coming out of it and seeing if the woman that in their own mind they are wooing and that they are having this romantic interaction with is interested. It is happening in a theoretical space, or it is happening in a numeric space, in a model, in a chart, in a theory, in a boardroom, but it is not organic. And the messiness of organic life and the messiness of interpersonal human interaction almost doesn't compute for these kinds of people. It's almost like it doesn't exist because they don't grasp it. And the vision that these kinds of people often have are hugely utopian. They're grandiose. They're gonna remake the world and solve everything and take away all problems. And they're going to reduce human suffering. And all of these terrific, huge visions, often on its face, in terms of common sense, in terms of practicality, seem absurd, but they make sense to the kinds of people who maybe think of things in such limited or such piecemeal ways. And they also don't make sense to those who think that living itself is not about the absence of challenge. It's not about, oh, let's eliminate all problems and then the world will be perfect. A utopia, by definition, is a dystopia. To think that you can make everything perfect is in itself to have scary views of the world, because perfection is the antithesis of the challenge of life, of living, of fumbling with each other and dealing with the complexities and surprises of our life. So here we are now, though, we can say very much the school of thought that won out, that is in charge of intellectual life of the day, is the techno-utopian mindset of these Silicon Valley nerds, for instance. Because while 50 years ago there was a conflict between the humanistic and the technic frame of minds, now the technic frame of mind is completely eclipsed humanistic thinking, because technics have money and they sponsor grants, they sponsor academia, they direct research in the direction that they think that is most beneficial, They direct research to quantifiable, to the charts, to the measurable, to remaking, to disrupting, to destroying the old. They don't want anything to do with the past. Everything in the future is going to be better. Humans are at war with nature and humans need to conquer nature. So the money that is being allocated in universities are often coming from foundations that are the charity work of the Silicon Valley billionaires. And our own media, of course, is completely transformed by where the money is coming and all the philanthropic giving to the media, as well as the receptiveness, the popularity of the technical language, of charts, of stats, of studies to make points. All of these are now reflected. All you need to do is go to the New York Times and you will see the great presence of visuals, of charts, of studies, of the idea that things can be improved, always improved by meddling more, by solving with artificial injections instead of allowing nature to solve things on its own. All of these things are now very present in media as well. And between media and jobs in Silicon Valley and universities and the amount of funding that politicians rely on in order to get reelected, we have a total ecosystem that is driven by the ideology of the technic. And I think add to that the everyday person is now extremely dependent on technology. We are like on life support with these gadgets. We now need them for so much just of everyday life, from our banking to our schooling to our universities to our work, that everyday people are not only in need of the technological world, but also are defenders of it. Nothing about this is conspiratorial. If you say you're a conspiracy theorist for saying that Bill Gates has power over the media, then that's simply silly, because it's quite out there. And when I used to have a car, you would hear this been brought to you by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the strange contradiction is that people know it but don't talk about it. If you talk about it, then you're a conspiracy theorist. But of course, this is important. It's important to follow the money. And there was a very, very good piece, or maybe it was two exposés in the Columbia Journalism Review. These are mainstream publications, and I've read the CJR for a long time, but they published a very good piece in August showing, for instance, the power Bill Gates has over health journalism. This is just, for instance, to call a quote. And that speaks to a larger trend and ethical issue with billionaire philanthropists bankrolling the news. The Broad Foundation, whose philanthropic agenda includes promoting charter schools, at one point funded part of the LA Times reporting on education. Charles Koch has made charitable donations to journalistic institutions such as Poynter Institute, as well as to news organizations such as Daily Caller News Foundation that support his conservative politics. And the Rockefeller Foundation funds Vox's Future Perfect, a reporting project that examines the world through the lens of effective altruism, often looking at philanthropy. Later in the article, the author says of the Gates Foundation, I recently examined nearly 20,000 charitable grants that Gates Foundation had made through the end of June and found more than 250 million going towards journalism. Recipients includes news operations like the BBC, NBC, Al Jazeera, ProPublica, National Journal, The Guardian, Univision, Medium, The Financial Times, The Atlantic, The Texas Tribune, Gannett, Washington Monthly, Le Monde, and the Center for the Investigative Reporting, and a variety of other groups creating news content or working on journalism, such as the Leo Burnett Company, an ad agency that Gates commissioned to create a news site, in quotes, to promote the success of aid groups. In this, I'm not even mentioning Jeff Bezos, who, of course, is the founder of Amazon and owns the Washington Post. So it's silly to deny that billionaires, the tech billionaires, are now the ones directing the public intellectual debate. It is only a matter of questioning how they are doing so and in what particular way they are. And in my perspective, I believe that they are directing us towards this brave new world. Like in the dystopia, their vision looks a lot like Aldous Huxley's fictional account of a dystopian future. In Brave New World, no one is seen aging. Life has been orchestrated so that there is no pain, and children are not conceived in the womb, they are artificially hatched. The soma is a drug that people take to keep themselves at a constant sort of level, and life has been orchestrated so as there is no illness, there is no suffering, there is none of the challenges that are in life now. This is how the controller of Western Europe describes it in Brave New World. People are happy, they get what they want, and they never want what they can't get. They're well off, they're safe, they're never ill, they're not afraid of death, they're blissfully ignorant of passion and old age. It's passion that is also next in this particular vision of the perfect world, because of course passion creates all of these ups and downs and creates all of these pains which are in the Brave New World seen as problematic and need to be eliminated. So in fact, close relationships in this world are discouraged. You have all of these sexual, unfulfilling relationships while at the same time never experiencing the deep human connection. In this world, there is a deviant who wants something else. Here's what the savage says. I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. I claim them all. And to this declaration by Savage, his interlocutor responds with a shrug. You're welcome to that. Here we prefer things comfortably. And I think this Brave New World vision, without passion or intimacy, I think most people today would also give me the shrug. I find that they do give me the shrug when I say, I don't want this. I don't think this is living. And I think confounding my pessimism is my knowledge from the Hasidic community that people conform, that people go along with things, that people tend to take the path of least resistance until they're very uncomfortable. I think most people only really get up and agitate for more when they are uncomfortable. In this Brave New World now, people are comfortable. They've been made comfortable by what technology can deliver and how it can circumvent the challenges, the discomforts of social interactions and the dramas of going out there in everyday life. And this means that the public is not largely opposed to these visions of the technocrats, or at the very least, I don't think they would reject or object to what might be orchestrated into this world of no suffering and also no feeling. The coronavirus pandemic, the entire response to it, has epitomized what I have seen for a long time to be this Brave New World. I've not had a smartphone for, I think, 2 years. Not that I'm without tech, I'm completely addicted, and I have spent much of today feeling this compulsion to refresh something and feeling really like I don't know what to do with myself without going on my iPad. But I have felt this relationship with technology to be bad ever since my Facebook debacle, and my son never had a smartphone, and it was probably one of my better moments as a parent because there is so much tech in our lives that I see no use for smartphones. And I feel that smartphones especially allow us to go through life and the slightest discomfort, boredom, the slightest need to sort of process anything, we have that kind of soma there to turn to click, to refresh, to distract, to divert. And I've always felt on the train, this packed subway with all of the faces buried in phones, like it's disturbing. It gives me the creeps. It makes my hair stand on end. And I thought, people like this. People want this. They are going to embrace it more and more. And now it's not only the packed train with all of the eyes in the phones, but also their entire mouth and nose is covered in a mask. So the experience of people who are kind of like hollowed out and creepy is even more pronounced. And I see it all as extremely connected to using technology and the technological mindset to make life less painful and to carve out the path of least resistance. The non-pharmaceutical responses to the pandemic, essentially the lockdowns, have been sold to us as the expert consensus. Again and again, we're being told by the media that this is the expert consensus, which is not true, of course. First of all, there have been loud expert deviations. Very important and very accomplished experts have demonstrated in very clear and accessible language why they reject the paths we've taken, and they've been sidelined. But also, I am sure that the vast majority of experts either have to keep quiet to protect their careers or have to convince themselves that they are with the mainstream opinion to protect their careers. Because so long as there is a lot of punishment and career consequences to speaking against a established narrative, then people are not going to speak out. So the expert consensus is a product of conformity and social punishment and not of actual established wisdom. The experts who have been directing the pandemic response have already exhibited for a while this orientation towards elimination of suffering through the inventions, through the works of science, the inventions of men. And I got a little bit of a glimpse of how this is becoming the dominant narrative during the measles outbreak in 2019 in the Hasidic community. When the measles spread, there were a lot of young children, and the measles spread, and there was a demographic, a small, I think it's a minority, no more dominant in the Hasidic community than in the secular public, but there was that minority that didn't want to vaccinate, and I am not at all criticizing them. I think it is their right, and I regret that at the time I did, but the anger and the groupthink and the bullying with which they were shamed into vaccinating and made to comply already spoke to the idea that we only allow the medical intervention route towards healing, and we no longer honor an alternative that might lean more on the naturalistic path. And I had always been quick to take antibiotics and quick to go to the doctor and say, get whatever I'm feeling to go away so I don't have to bother with it. And I was frankly surprised by how vicious and how exaggerated and how dogmatic the attack on the Hasidic community was. But now, as I'd watched the coronavirus response play out up close and for such a long period, I understand that the people in charge and the people who are sponsoring and the people who are directing public health see vaccines and see interventions as the utopia, as the one of the ingredients to this brave new world. Anthony Fauci is a good example, an illustration of a specific philosophy. He's not neutral, he's not a scientist without his own worldview, and he has been extremely important and has played a role in allocating funding, including to gain of function research, and he's been in the government for 50 years and advised presidents in one capacity or another since Ronald Reagan. his role in the HIV/AIDS epidemic is very controversial, and if you look at his own words, you get a sense for a man with a very specific philosophy. I'm going to read to you a bit where he talks about how modern life is creating a necessity for us to sort of conquer our threats, and in order to eliminate threats, we need to change the entire way in which we live. He says, living in greater harmony with nature will require changes in human behavior as well as other radical changes that may take decades to achieve. Rebuilding the infrastructure of human existence, from cities to homes to workplaces to water and sewer systems to recreational and gathering venues. In such a transformation, we will need to prioritize changes in those human behaviors that constitute a risk for the emergence of infectious diseases. Chief among them are reducing crowding at home, work, and in public places, as well as minimizing environmental perturbations such as deforestation, intense urbanization, and intensive animal farming. In other words, he is saying that we need to minimize city living, that we need to minimize our crowded venues for concerts, for celebrating New Year's, all of these experiences that are euphoric, that are bringing us all together, are being rebranded in his worldview as threats. They create an opportunity for the passing of pathogens, and therefore they are now scary and dangerous. I think this is the worldview of a hypochondriac who is not dealing with her problems. It's the worldview of someone who has a big problem. But this worldview is driving our entire social, economic, political, philosophical world, because it is where the money is, it is where the power is. So for instance, the practical application of that is that here in New York, where my son is in the New York City public school system, the school system is being reshaped by none other than Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who joined Governor Cuomo to recreate Build Back Better, so-called, and he said, the first priorities of what we're trying to do are focused on telehealth, remote learning, and broadband. We need to look for solutions that can be presented now and accelerated, and use technology to make things better. And Governor Cuomo, our governor himself, said that this was, quote, a moment in history when we can actually incorporate and advance Bill Gates' ideas. All these buildings, all these physical classrooms, why, with all the technology you have? End quote. Why do you need buildings? We can all be learning in the home with tech, in a view that technology itself can solve things, and that you can take out the social emotional, that you can take out the interpersonal, the organic, the messy. And this is the brainchild, the brainchildren of our techno overlords who have so much money that they translate it, they exchange it into a currency of power, and then that power changes my son's schooling, it changes my own work life, it changes all of our lives on the nitty-gritty level. This is not a neutral approach. Eric Schmidt and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all of these technocrats don't have neutral ideas. Their ideas are technocratic. Anytime you think ideas are neutral, you look at the Hasidic community and you ask yourself, would they have invented this? If not, then you realize it's cultural. You might agree with it, but it's not neutral. Hasidic community is not moving any of their educations into the house, and no one is saying, well, do we still need buildings? Let's keep all the children in the home. In fact, one of the most head scratchers of articles by an OTT person was an article by Frieda Goldberger for one of the Jewish magazines, urging the Hasidic community to start to go on the internet and to also follow their rest of the country's Zoom-based education, which is so strange. I don't even read that. I'm like, what is this? But this kind of thing you can say, because this is the kind of thing we've been oriented towards hearing, and this is where the zeitgeist is at. Elon Musk, of course, is the comic book caricature of this tech boy, and him with his giant ego and insane ideas, and salivating, slobbering followers at his heels, thinking he is going to colonize Mars, has proposed and been taken seriously for his Hyperloop, which is going to solve all problems with transportation. And one of my favorite YouTube videos is some guy, I will link the video, taking apart the Hyperloop and showing all the engineering difficulties that would come out of if you want to create 8 tunnels running under cities. You run into the sewage, you run into the wiring, you run into foundations, you run into merging problems, all of these things. Of course, they are problems that would be created, but in the mind of this person living in his head, and of people who are not practical, the idea is that you can solve everything. Oh, we'll make problems with climate change go away by releasing a balloon that will let out a bunch of some gas, and there won't be any consequences and no unforeseen effects because we have tested it in a lab. It's almost absurd. Sometimes I want to pinch myself and say this cannot be real. I was just reading this week a study conducted on the question of would people comply with orders, quarantine or isolating orders in the event of a disease, of an infectious disease, and the findings were that people would get fatigue. But the method for studying it was on a video game simulation. And Neil Ferguson's modeling, similarly, all his modeling of projected deaths are also on a kind of simulation that is similar to the Sims game, which is a simulation of life. You enter formulas and it results in 6 bubbles of good mood or 2 bubbles of bad mood. And these things that in theory look, maybe they make sense to people, they just don't translate into reality. As the guy from that video taking apart Elon Musk's Hyperloop says, there is AS and FM. There's actual science and there's fucking magic. And much of what we're being fed today as solutions that exist in databases and in simulations are fucking fucked up magic, and it is not science. When the Hasidic community had the measles outbreak in 2019, the New York Times quoted 2 experts as saying that all of their models had predicted that the next outbreak would happen in towns near airports, and they would have never expected that it would happen in the Hasidic community. And you read that and you want to bang your head against a wall, because it's like, what did you think? Did you not realize that a community filled with very young children is going to pass pathogens around more quickly, that things are going to break out there more frequently than in a sterilized world of adults living alone, which is much more the case outside of the Hasidic community? But the New York Times doesn't criticize these experts. They don't question the very foundation, the system with which the models project future problems, because, again, we are not looking outside of the dogma of the technocracy. The techno-dystopia is now the normative, and we don't question it. It is our dogma now. I think a part of what's helped it become our dogma is the huge collection of entertainment, of media that depicts all of these ideas that are expressed by these billionaires. In a movie, you can have a time machine. In a movie, you can have a pandemic with a mad scientist in his garage finding the cure. In a movie, you can have these people transform suddenly into a different creature. And in a movie, you can have a sexy robot girlfriend. You can create a Frankenstein and it will be hot and sexy and satisfying and intelligent. And artificial intelligence is perfect yet robotic. It is everything that a tech bro can hope for. It is manageable by numbers, it can be programmed, but it also does all the good things that confusing and messy humans do. But of course, that's movies, and people watch it and tell themselves that they don't get affected by it, but they buy it. You just buy it because you saw it, and visual images are very powerful, and a part of your brain believes it experienced it. It's as simple as that. And then people think it's possible based on so much conditioning and so much bias. There's so much money in it that altogether the end result is that here we are in this brave new world, getting ever more brave new world, a lovely, lovely snow day. And I want to sit at the window and sip hot coffee and watch the snow come down, but I feel like half my body is twitching and saying, check your messages, check your this, check your that. And I feel like, damn, I need some of that soma. I will not be able to survive without it. It is so magnetic. It is so hard to resist. What hope is there that we would? I think the future fault lines are going to be between technics and the humanists. I don't think it's going to be much of a battle. I think technics are going to have the upper hand. They have everything in their courts, but I don't look at the world in the view of Republicans or Democrats, the right or the left, although I am on the left. But I don't see the world as ideologically divided in Hasidic or ex-Hasidic or whatever, all of these upper class and educated and not educated. I think the most important fault line of the future is going to be, are you a savage or are you a respectable citizen of the brave new world, taking your soma and making sure not to love and not to feel and not to live too much? And damn, it's a sad future to contemplate. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Very Not Normal podcast with me, Frieda Vizel. If you liked it, please consider spreading the word, liking, subscribing, sharing. You can also leave me feedback by going to my anchor.fm page. There is a link in the episode description of how to get to it. I'm also including in the episode description links to other sources I'm mentioning in the podcast so you can do your further deep dives. If you would like to, you can also check out my other work at friedavizel.com. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.